thank you for attending this meeting, the Public Service Board Select Committee. I think the first item on the agenda is to elect a chair. Hazel, what do we do?
Yes, we agreed, Chair, at the last meeting that we would actually take rotation of chair at each meeting, with the serving chair remaining until the following meeting to take actions forward. So I think we agreed that you would be the chair for today, and then we will elect the chair at the next meeting. So can we just note that Councillor Penny Jones is elected as chair? Thank you.
Thank you very much. I think next on the agenda, I think we will have introductions so that those who are looking at us and following our meeting will know who we are. So I will start by saying I'm Councillor Penny Jones. I'm chair of CY Children and Young People Select, and I'm chair of the Public Service Board Select Committee today.
Good morning, I'm Peter Farley. I'm the County Councillor for St Mary's Chepstow, chair of the Adult Select Committee, and I'm sitting here because I chaired the previous meeting, and I guess that might be a practice we want to continue.
Hazel Eilert, Scrutiny.
Paula Harris, Democratic Services.
Paul Matthews, Chief Executive Officer.
Hazel Clatworthy, Sustainability Policy Officer.
Matthew Gatehouse, Policy and Performance Manager.
Sharon Nye, PSB Development Manager and Strategic Partnership Team.
Councillor Dimitri Petruni, Councillor for St Christopher's Chepstow.
Councillor Linda Guppy, Councillor for Roggett.
Councillor Sarah Jones, Lanover, Chair of Economy and Development Select.
Frances Taylor, County Councillor for Mill and Chair Democratic Services Committee.
Good morning everyone, Councillor Howarth, Chair of Strong Communities.
Thank you all. Next, apologies for absence. Are there any, please?
Thank you, Chair. We've received apologies this morning from Councillor John Prosser.
Thank you. Item number 3, declarations of interest. Shall we go for...
As and when, Chair?
As and when. Thank you very much. Okay. Item 4 is a public open forum, and as you can see, there are no members of the public at present. So the next item will be the minutes of the previous meeting held on the 28th of June. And we'll go through it for matters arising and any alterations. So shall we go through page 1?
Chair.
Yes.
Sorry. I don't think it suggests there's any apologies on there, but I believe I did give my apologies for absence.
Oh, fine. Okay. Can that be noted, please? Right. Page 1.
Sorry, Chair.
Yes.
Same applies. I did give
yes.
my apologies, but
Yeah.
they're not noted. Thank you.
Right. Okay. Anybody else? Page 2. Page 3. Page 4. And that's it. Are there any matters arising? Well, in fact, I think the matters arising are the recommendations in particular, and we will be taking those forward in this meeting. So can we have those taken as read, please? Okay, incorrect. Thank you. Right, the next item on the agenda is the discussion with the Chair of the Public Service Board, who's Paul Matthews. We are aware that there hasn't been a Public Service Board meeting since our last meeting, probably due to the summer recess. I'm sure you will say something about that, Paul. We would like, in particular, perhaps that you would mention, and then perhaps we'll follow through with questions, when you start to lead this discussion, perhaps the items of the powers afforded to scrutiny would be one such issue, holding the PSB to account. The capacity of the Public Service Board to deliver the wellbeing assessment, and the recommendations made by the Select Committee to the PSB on their governance arrangements, which you will note in the letter which follows this item. Have you all got a copy of the letter? Right. I think what we'll do, Paul, if you could start to lead the discussion, and then we'll follow through with any questions afterwards, if that's all right. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. Shall I offer you around a 5-minute overview in terms of where the board is and what it's doing? Okay. Public Service Board itself is still, it's quite a baby really. It's only met a few times, and it's morphed out of what we used to have, which was a local service board. Monmouthshire's local service board has been around for several years. Certainly in its earlier incarnations, I think it's debatable about the value that it added in any way, shape or form. And it was certainly the view of a number of the statutory partners, a view that we took about 18 months ago, that it just needed to change, and it needed to change quite significantly and become a lot more focused. The Public Service Board itself, I guess as you will be aware from your initial meeting, has some statutory basis. It's not an optional endeavour. There are members prescribed in legislation, and there are others not so. And interestingly, in our sort of space, as I know you covered last time, you know, it's a little bit unusual that you find the police force not being a statutory member, just by way of example. The reason being that they're not entirely a devolved function. Notwithstanding that, we've been quite fortunate, I think, over the course of the last period to have a police force, a police and crime commissioner and a chief constable that have been particularly committed to an agenda based on partnership. So the vagaries of the law just aren't getting in the way of the business, really. As I say, the Public Service Board itself is quite new, it's quite fresh. I think it's probably only met three times, I think, actually. And our next meeting is on the 26th of this month. So it's still something that's finding a direction. But it is a board that's extremely keen to change the way that it's seen and perceived by the communities of Monmouthshire. Now, just by way of example, the board itself has agreed that it will meet here. It will meet here so that we can take advantage of the webcasting facilities that we have here. It's a board that wants to do its business in the public eye. That's not a feature of, I think, any public service board actually in Wales at this current moment in time, but it just feels like a good thing to do. One of our earliest conversations was about accountability and how the board itself would be held to account. So the timing of your inaugural meeting and I think the content of your letter to me as an agent of the board, I think it is timely, actually, because I think it will be received well, and the board consider it important that Monmouthshire County Council as, I guess, the seat of democracy for the county, is seen to act at times possibly quite forcibly, but always with a genuine interest for the work that's being done. The focus of the board, I think, as you will understand, and it will be picked up in the next agenda item at the moment, is the work necessary to allow us to put forward a meaningful and hopefully small set of priorities that will focus our actions over the course of the coming years. And my colleagues are here today to give you an update in terms of the way that the board has commissioned and indeed is building a wellbeing assessment for the communities of Monmouthshire. We've taken a view, I hope you think it's a sensible view, that we will base the communities of Monmouthshire around the 5 principal settlements. There are a multitude of ways of cutting our county, but we've decided that we will build largely on the footprint of Chepstow, Caldicot, Usk, Abergavenny and Monmouth. That's not looking to disenfranchise or indeed dislocate any other settlement, but it just seemed to be a reasonable planning architecture. And my colleagues will tell you over the course of the next sort of 20 minutes, 30 minutes, about how we've tried to take a very, very different approach to meeting people where they are, rather than encouraging people to come and meet us where we are. I think, Chair, one of your early comments in your first meeting was a concern around things such as capacity and the meaningful contribution of partners. Again, I think a timely conversation. The council, frankly, does take a lead in most of the organisational side of the PSB, but we are not alone. I think, it was commented at your first meeting about, or somebody introduced to you, the way that we use a programme board to support the Public Service Board. The programme board, I have to say, has been an absolute strength over the course of the last 15 to 18 months. And we are joined by representatives from partner agencies that don't just rock up for a bit of a chat. They turn up with an agenda, they take responsibility, and they co-lead particular parts of the agenda that previously we were running as a local service board. And I guess, Sharon, you're very well placed to comment on that if you're interested in that in detail. The actual mechanics of running the Public Service Board, I would describe us right now as running at the edge of our capacity. Can I accurately foresee what the next 12 to 15 months looks like? Not at this point in time. But for the PSB to be effective, I think it's something that we're going to have to keep quite a close eye on, because the model that we have, yes, is focused principally around some of my colleagues, some of your officers, Sharon particularly, Matthew particularly, David Barnes, and one or two others. But we've tried to develop a model over the last period whereby a significant number of individuals take responsibility and feel responsibility for the activity of the PSB. I think one of the fair critiques of the local service board would have been an absolute focus on too few individuals, and consequently the agenda certainly wasn't diffusing within the system, and that was a bit of a problem for us. So we have the capability at the moment to ensure that the PSB operates appropriately. If the PSB starts to become a force, if it really starts to work as a functioning gathering of some of the top public servants in the county, we may need to take a weather check in terms of whether we actually have the right resource to continually support that. I don't have the ability as your chief executive to put more of my officers into this space at this point in time. And there is a live conversation to take place between the statutory partners, certainly, in terms of how we come up with a co-resourcing model for the PSB. I think I'm right in saying that nobody in Wales has actually lanced that yet. We certainly surfaced it at the first meeting of the Public Service Board, so our partners know that there is a live conversation that needs to be concluded, and they didn't shy away from it. Indeed, I'd go further. Before I could bring it up, it was brought up by the chair of Aneurin Bevan, David Jenkins, who took a view very, very clearly that as a statutory partner, he expected to be a partner, and that would carry a rights and a responsibilities agenda. So not concluded, but open for conversation. But again, in the spirit of candidness, our focus right now is on the compilation of a wellbeing assessment. The board intend placing pretty much an absolute reliance on that work to determine the priorities that they take forward. They've already indicated that they want it to be a very, very small number of very difficult priorities, not the easy things that can be catered for by sovereign agencies, but the things that we find awkward and our citizens are telling us really matter to them. Timescales we can talk about in agenda item 7, if that's helpful to you. Trying to think whether there were any other issues that you caught in your letter that might be useful just to open up. One of the points you raised in the letter to me, not so much in the minute, but in the letter, was your interest in futures work. I think you noted that there was some futures work that had been commissioned in other places, and you were interested to know whether that was an intention of the Public Service Board for Monmouthshire. As it happens, Monmouthshire County Council is going to be looking at commissioning some futures work. We are going to do that as part of our future Monmouthshire programme. It's a programme that the Council is taking forward to enable us to get a better feel for the landscape that's likely to be presented to us 5, 10, 15 years out, and how perhaps we need to morph our organisation to recognise that work will have as much validity to the PSB as it will to us. So I think, Chair, I can give you some comfort that we are going to be doing some work in that area, which will complement and supplement the work that is already planned and has taken place to give us an evidence base from which to construct a meaningful wellbeing plan. My final contribution, just by way of introduction, would perhaps just be to chuck a few more balls up in the air, because that's always fun, isn't it? As councillors, you would have been following over the course of the last couple of months, but certainly over the last couple of weeks, announcements made in Wales Government by Cabinet Secretary Mark Drakeford in terms of the future, principally, I guess, of local government, but that was set within a wider context of public service reform. One of the aspects that Mark Minister Drakeford has been very, very clear on is that he expects to see collaboration of a different order over the course of the coming period. I can't define different order to you because I don't think anybody can at the moment. But the idea is that it's more systematic, and it's based on one of two principal footprints insofar as we are concerned as a civic area. Footprint one would be, I guess, the old preserved County of Gwent footprint, where we feel that there are service offers that could and should align themselves at scale to a footprint that both the Nairn and Bevan Health Board and Gwent Police share. We do have some advantages that others don't in terms of coterminosity. Mark Drakeford wants to see those advantages accelerated and taken, and he's focusing particularly on the health and social care interface. So as a public service board, and indeed as sovereign agencies, we can't ignore that. The second footprint is more about South East Wales, a footprint that I guess we've characterised over the last 12 months as being the Cardiff capital region. In terms of council areas, that's made up of 10 council areas. I'm tempted to try to list them, but can you ever get 10 when you want to get 10? I'll certainly say it involves Monmouthshire. Monmouthshire, Torfaen, Merthyr, Blaenau Gwent, Newport, Cardiff, Bridgend, the Vale, Rhondda Cynon Taf. Do you get the general sort of sense of the territory that I'm talking about? There are some facets of our work, or work that we have an interest in, that a footprint based on the preserved County of Gwent probably isn't right for. And if I were to paraphrase those, they're probably areas where we've had partnerships over the last 10 to 15 years that started with the title South East Wales, and they've tended to be in the domains of housing, economy, transportation, things of that nature. So the Minister expects to see more collaboration on that level, that footprint. As a public service board, we can't be shy about that. But the final, I guess, introductory remark I would offer you is that Cabinet Secretary Drakeford has already introduced the idea that does, for example, an area such as Monmouthshire need to have a public service board? Wouldn't a public service board be better if it was aggregated at a preserved County of Gwent level? So we have a public service board for a wider area of geography, and that's a conversation that needs to find a way forward. If you're interested in my particular view, you can ask me after and I will offer it. But I share that with you, Chair, just to make it clear that whilst we're dealing with a baby that's yet to really find its place within our own landscape, we're also dealing with a contestable baby that might be required to grow a little bit larger, a little bit more quickly than perhaps we originally thought. So by way of introduction, I hope that's useful in sort of scoping out the landscape, and clearly I'll try to be as responsive as I can to your questions.
Thank you, Paul. That was very useful. Yes, several points are raised. Can we just go back? You did mention the letter at one point that was sent to you. There were 2 recommendations made, and one is about attendance or lack of attendance, which would have severe implications on the success of the PSB, I would have thought. Do you agree that perhaps it should be within its remit that they ask for deputies to attend?
It's a really interesting point, and let me tell you why. And apologies for offering you a sort of perhaps a 3-year perspective. So I'm comparing and contrasting a local service board as was, where we took it, and how that's now evolving into a public service board. If I go back a couple of years, I don't really know what the local service board was. We had a random collection of people turning up when they fancied it. Quite keen to talk about interesting things. But if you're looking for action points and delivery, you need really good eyesight to find any. There wasn't a discipline around it in any way, shape or form. An evolution that we put in place within the local service board was to narrow down the membership, frankly. You've always got this tension, haven't you, between being, I guess, an exclusive club and an inclusive movement. But we felt that we'd gone too far in terms of the people that were involved to being an inclusive movement, and that was proving very difficult in terms of making progress. And we've tried to take that forward into the Public Service Board by introducing a discipline where, on the whole, attendance is very good in comparison, certainly to other public service boards that I'm aware of. We have people that turn up consistently. I guess we all know in our work that there are levels of work, aren't there? There is the technical detail, but when you start to form relationships, things tend to happen, in my experience, more quickly because you make commitments to each other which you don't want to break. So actually, attendance at the LSB and the PSB has become a reasonable strength because knowledge has been working its way back into the system. Your point about whether it would strengthen us even further to involve, and I would say, a designated deputy, I am quite comfortable to take back to the PSB. What I don't want to have is the current chair of that body is a different person turning up at every meeting. So if we move towards an environment where we have a deputy, I'd ask you to consider that deputy being a designated individual, so that we continue to accrue knowledge, and we're not talking with and having conversations with individuals that just don't have the context of our work. In my experience, that tends to lead to poor feedback into sovereign organisations, and you find yourselves at the next iteration trying to recover ground that you haven't quite managed to solidify. The idea, I think, is good. I would just encourage you to think about the notion of designated.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you, Paul. I think, in fact, it must be clarified, but that is exactly what we meant, a designated deputy. We did not mean a general deputy, just somebody can you pop along to this meeting. I think the area it's too important an issue. Likewise, action points could be raised perhaps at the end of a PSB meeting and carried forward to a select, which might be helpful to us. And to yourselves.
Absolutely the intention. The PSB will be and needs to be business focused, or focused on the business, I should say. So the disciplines that you would expect to be in place will be in place.
Thank you very much. Can I open up to anybody? Would anybody like to ask questions at this stage? No, Councillor Farley.
Paul, thank you, and thank you for taking us through the points in the original letter in such detail. I'm a little unclear as to your occupying the role of chairman, whether that is actually something that is built into the design, as it were, whether it's happened by default, whether it's something you want to do. I'm just interested, because when I wrote to you, I carefully said the chair for the time being because I had the impression that there might have been a change on the way. Not that I would wish to see it, but I didn't know whether it was something you were expecting.
It's certainly something I'd like to see. Again, straight questions, straight answers. It's not a position that I've particularly ever wanted to hold. Indeed, I'd go further. Certainly within the earlier times of the Local Service Board, I didn't actually feel it was a good thing for Monmouthshire County Council to actually hold a position that could be seen by others to be a position of power. I thought it was a much better idea to cede that to third parties. I have to say, I think that didn't quite work out in the way that we had hoped. I assumed the chair, Councillor Farley, largely because partners asked me to assume the chair. I'm trying to think about how I word this. I attempted to galvanise a conversation at our first meeting about it being a good time for that position to change. The council was required to chair the inaugural meeting of the Public Service Board. That was a requirement. When we come together on the 26th, I think if we've managed to find a willing volunteer, I'll be delighted to hand the baton on.
Thank you for the straight answer. We will have to think whether we should be, what we should be encouraging, but I don't want to be misunderstood here. We recognise that you needed to take the chair from the beginning, and actually from what we've heard, I'm personally glad that you did, but the future is another matter, and we might want to keep an eye on that one for your sake, if for nobody else's.
Thank you. Councillor Petroni, followed by
I
Councillor
listened very
Howard.
carefully to what you said. And I know it's a baby, but actually how you start this is actually probably more important. The groundwork is incredibly important because actually when you go, say, 2 years down the line, it's much harder then to unwind things. So actually if you start out properly, then I think you have far greater chance of success. And what struck me about your words is if you said, if it becomes a force of change. And I was struck by the word if, because presumably it's meant to be a force of change. And that worries me that you said the word if, because that presumes that means that it might not be. And which in case, in my mind, that means it's failing or will fail. So I wonder your reflection on that, or maybe just, maybe you just used the word if, but you weren't meant to. You said the future trends. That's interesting, and that the council's going to lead it itself. But then surely we're already seeing little partners go off and do it, rather than all the partners going and checking. So we're doing it as part of the council, and that you said there was supplement. But I don't know, maybe in my little mind, surely all the partners should be involved straight away from the get-go, not a partner office by itself doing it. And thirdly, you threw the other balls in the air, so I'm going to try and catch some of them. The bigger picture stuff, you talked about Cardiff Capital Region, talked about housing economy, stuff that most people would assume is critical to well-being, the whole point of what we're here for. And then we're talking about alternative delivery models, not only in this council, but in other councils that have already been migrated across. And now we have the PSB as well. So we have 3 separate functions, all critical to well-being and being able to deliver well-being. But we've already got 3 separate organisations, and it's just like, bureaucratic nightmare. And give me some reassurance that we'll speak to each other, Paul.
I'll start at the end, if that's okay. If we only had 3, what an absolute delight that would be. I suspect it's even a little bit more complicated than that. But trying to pick your points up in order. I use the word if because whilst I'm a big fan of intent, I'm a bigger fan of evidence. This has met twice. I know what the legislation says. I understand the thinking that underpins the formation of a public service board. The idea is, in a thumbnail sketch, that you bring together the top table players active within public and civil society, and you set them to work on the challenges that no single agency can sort for itself. Right? I think it's quite difficult to argue with that as an intent. If you really, I haven't done this work, but I suspect if somebody had, if you did a balance sheet of time invested in local service boards and mapped that against outcomes that could be directly attributed to that time, I think maybe you'd have a bit of plausibility. Causality, I think, would be tougher. I think if will remain if for me until I can demonstrate that the time that we invest is achieving something that otherwise would not have been achieved. I think it's easy for things like PSBs, LSBs to claim great victories, but when you mine it, the real question is, would it have happened anyway? Or has it happened because something else has come into place to make it happen? The PSB is ultimately a creature for leadership. It's about system leadership rather than agency leadership, and that's tough. And I think it will take a little while for these organisations and the individuals that make them up to actually understand that their role is plural. They arrive as a representative, as a sovereign agency. They leave that description at the door. They're now a system leader charged with the civic well-being of an area. Words are cheap sometimes, aren't they? That's a very different challenge. So I use the word if deliberately. It's not yet proven. So how can you claim it to be? So I hope that makes some sort of sense to you. At some point in time, you need to be scrutinising the PSB and saying, where's your evidence? Where you're making a claim, show me the evidence. You have a well-being assessment based on evidence. We can see that evidence trail, we believe it or we don't. That led to a set of priorities and you committed to action on those priorities. Show us how you've bent your budgets. Show us how you've adjusted the way that you align your human resource. Show us what you've done and then give us some. I think you need to be asking direct questions about causality, and that's hard, but it's the right set of questions. So I hope that sort of helps. Whether you're happy with it is another thing, but I think that's a truthful position from my perspective. In terms of your latter point, because I've forgotten your middle one, it'll come back to me in a minute. The point about 2 and 3 agencies, it is a complex landscape. There's no doubt at all about that. The Cardiff Capital Region is an emerging regional instrument of governance. You know, some people think about it as something to run a city deal. Well, I'd encourage you all. I've tried to introduce a language which says, think about a city deal as being material. Think about a city region as being fundamental. You know, it's a big task and a big piece of work. And in power, legitimacy, accountability, it's really an emerging design which introduces almost a double devolution to Wales and opens up the door to, do powers stay in Cardiff Bay, or do they start to come down to localities? Possibly something that as a PSB select you might become interested in. Certainly as councillors you will be interested in. Working with 9 other councils principally, but trying to galvanise a set of conversations with an economic entity called the Cardiff Capital Region is hard yards. And I would have thought it's going to be interesting, certainly from the evidence that we see coming through the formation of a wellbeing assessment. I'm going to be interested to see the strength of feeling that we hear about things like regional transportation. I suspect transportation is coming through as a major theme. I'm going to be interested by what we're hearing about job opportunities, particularly for young people, but possibly for all people. I'm going to be interested by what we're hearing about the ability of Monmouthshire as an individual space to satisfy those needs in comparison perhaps to a capital region's ability to satisfy those needs. I think you might be interested in some of that stuff as it goes forward. We've had something called a G7, a Gwent 7, that's existed a little bit for an extended number of years now. What that was basically a place where the leaders of the 5 councils, the chief executives of the 5 councils, and the Police Crime Commissioner, Chief Constable, Chairperson, and Chief Executive of Venara and Bevan came together, and we've chatted about stuff. It's quite informal, in many ways relationship building. But actually one of the features of Gwent, which you don't realise until you start to step outside of our territory, is that informal relationship building is actually really, really useful. And because it means that you can actually pick up a telephone and someone's going to answer. And it doesn't take 3 days to get into somebody's diary. You can get somebody in 30 seconds when you need to. So the basis of, certainly at a leadership level, of a relational agenda, I would argue has had some investment over the course of the last few years. And as I say, if I'll offer you a view in terms of PSBs if you want it. Otherwise, I'll keep my counsel on it. But it's a lot more complex than 3. I think you know that. The sense-making agenda over the next 12 months is going to be of absolute primacy, because otherwise the limited and reducing resource that we have will be spent more in navigating confusion than delivering outcomes.
Sorry, that's a bit scary response. The second one was about future trend, and already Monmouthshire is doing it by itself.
Perhaps I mispresented that a little bit. Certainly our statutory partners are really interested in getting a better grip in terms of where the world's going to be 5, 7, 10 years out. Future Monmouthshire programme is not a discrete piece of work just locked to the council. It's a piece of work that we've enfranchised to anybody with an interest. So it's likely that we will commission a piece of work because we're better placed to do it than perhaps some others, which our colleague organisations are as interested in and they are as engaged in. What we're not doing at the minute, but I think that this is just an issue of timing and frequency of meetings. I think if the PSB was a little bit more mature, the PSB itself may well have commissioned this piece of work as part of the build of evidence for the wellbeing assessment. It just hasn't, that's all. So I think the sovereign agencies coming together are in a position to do it, and I think it will supplement the work. I hope it will supplement the work really well that Matthew and Sharon are going to talk to you about when we come to item 7. So I'd urge you not to be too alarmed or too nervous that we have a separation or the left not knowing what the right is doing. That's not the way that it feels.
Thank you. I think that can probably be brought up later as well. But Councillor Howes, followed by Councillor Sarah Jones.
I think mine's probably the later one, but I will ask Paul a question because he did say about it. Is the cluster situation that we are developing now to bring this forward with the 5 main towns? You did mention we've come to that decision of 5 main towns, but do you believe that is the right direction on making sure that the other side of the cluster side of it does have its direction and will be thought about within the wellbeing assessment direction, because we are unique in Monmouthshire, and probably what you do have is I'd say 50% is outside the towns. I'm trying to get these towns to communicate. I know we've started the process now of having the meetings, but the feedback I'm having is it's going to be really difficult to get these the other side of it to come together. When will we make that decision on whether we're going to take that forward or not? Because it hasn't been made yet, has it? And that is fully part of what we're going to be looking at with the Wellbeing Act as well, because there is the communities side of it.
There are a couple of levels to that question. And arguably some of them are more important to the council than perhaps they are to PSB partners. Turn your mic off, Councillor Howard. So if I were being more accurate with my language, perhaps a better way of doing it would have been to say, look, we have to find a way and a mechanism of trying to build an engagement strategy. We've chosen to base that on geographies that happen to have 5 of our principal settlements within them. I think when the guys give you a sense of where they've been and what they've been doing over the last 2 to 3 months, I think you'll draw some very quick comfort that it has not been town-based. It has not been rural-based. It's been based where hundreds and thousands of people have chosen to go, and we've gone there. We have a couple of levels of work, as you will all know, that's, I guess, ongoing within the council. One of those levels, I'd say at a very base but a very important level, is to develop through design the relationships that we have with our town and community councils. We're very fortunate to be rich in town and community councils, i.e. we've got loads. It doesn't always feel fortunate, but actually if we didn't have all of those volunteers giving of their time, then we would be much poorer for that. So, you know, taking the rough with the smooth, a magnificent asset. Our organisation as a council perhaps hasn't been as organised and engaging with that asset as maybe we've needed to be, and at times we've almost treated that relationship like a principal-agent relationship. We say you do. At other times, town and community councils have wanted a relationship to be principal-agent. You say and we'll do. That's an absolutely inappropriate relationship for where we're going now. So we're trying to rebuild some of our principal engagement mechanisms with town and community councils around that footprint of 5, just so that we have a planning architecture that we can service, and I have the ability from a council perspective to attach one of my chief officers to each and every one of those settings, so that I can be assured that those individuals, those community and town councillors, have the benefit of real insight in terms of what we are doing, but also what we plan to do. So we're using that as a footprint for our democratic engagement, I suppose, with town and community councils. As a council, you've still got to come to a final view in terms of community governance. And I'm sure that I'm looking at 5 of you, and that might mean that there are 2 or 3 different views on the outcome of that. Mine is it's just got to be clean and sharp. You know, I don't have the officers anymore to service complex endeavours, and I'm back to my causality, that I can't see really serve a purpose and make a change. So is the architecture perfect, Councillor Howarth? I don't think a perfect architecture exists for you know, such a wonderful place as Monmouthshire. Is it a reasonable one on which to try to work? I think so. But I'd encourage you, as I encourage my colleagues, not to think about, for example, Usk as a settlement, but to think about the fact that Usk is just a hub for a large central swathe of Monmouthshire that perhaps has got different issues to Sevenside, perhaps has got different issues to Meagher-Undy, and perhaps they want to talk about them in a different way. So we want to, I think we want to get a little bit more intimate with the different parts of our county. Will it work? Absolutely. For everybody? Not a chance. Not a chance. But will it create the ability for people to engage and for us to engage with people in a way that's better than has been the case over the last couple of years? I think so. And I think it's worth a go.
Can I have a supplementary, Chair? So what we're saying then, we as a body will do that checklist for you, is it? Because we will be scrutinising actually what the outcome of that setup is, and if we believe it's not working, or sorry to use the word if we believe that it's possibly not the right scenario, we can perhaps recommend to change it. That's our job. Am I right in saying that?
I'd encourage you at all times to remember what your role is and try not to stray beyond it. Select committees, wonderful things. They've got a habit of, they can at times stray all over the place, which is fun, but it's not always effective. You're here as a Public Service Board Select Committee. One of your first challenges is to satisfy yourselves that the evidence base that's been drawn together through a wellbeing assessment is sufficient and detailed enough to form a basis of a small set of priorities that the Public Service Board choose to take forward. I'm sure in coming to that view, one of the things that you'll ask yourself will be, do you know what, has sufficient account been given to the various geographies of Monmouthshire, the various communities of Monmouthshire? So, or for example, has Sharon just sat down in Caldicot and formed all of her views from 15 conversations held in Longfellow Road or the Baptist Church or in school? Or actually is there real evidence that an attempt has been made to engage with young and old, north and south, east and west? And I could go on. You need to satisfy yourself that an attempt has been made, a good attempt to draw a rich evidence base from which action can be taken forward. I don't think necessarily it's your role to sit and discuss whether you think that the council's particular approach to community engagement is right or wrong, but you will have a view on that through the lens of the PSB. You've got other environments for some of that conversation. And all I would encourage you is just don't try and rerun the same conversation in 2 or 3 places, because in my experience it just becomes confusing and you'll end up being frustrated. I think here you can have a lot to focus on because you're dealing with some very significant organisations, spending some very significant money, and you're going to want to satisfy yourself that their efforts are making a difference.
I didn't lose direction on what I was saying. What I'm trying to make the point is we part of the Wellbeing Act, that is in it, and if it means that we actually have to look at progress, Chair, what is the outcome then at the end of it if we have a discussion? I know you might say there's different bodies have that. What is the outcome at the end of it for us as a select? I think that's the point. Is it?
I'm not understanding your question really, Councillor Howarth. I guess if I understood your question a little bit more, I could possibly offer you a sharper answer.
Thank you.
I think Councillor Howard's question is not necessarily suggesting that this is a role for this select committee, but I think he's concerned that scrutiny in general, as in perhaps a joint meeting of the other selects, would like to sort of discuss at some stage the outcomes of the community governance review.
Does that satisfy you, Councillor Howard? Okay. Shall we move on at this stage, or Paul, do you want to come back on that? No. Okay. Councillor Sarah Jones, and followed by Councillor Taylor, and then.
Yeah, so we're speaking about how it's almost a bottom-up approach in terms of feeding in from the community into the assessment and part of the engagement process. But I'm just interested to know what the relationship and the interface will be with the Commissioner herself, what engagement has taken place so far and what you perceive will happen in the future, given that she's the guardian of this and supposed to support the 44 public bodies and the PSBs under the legislation. I've got my own concerns around her capacity and her team's capacity to be able to do that, but just in terms of how you perceive her engagement with the PSB group as it stands.
Before you come back in, please may I just point out to everybody that the Commissioner was invited to this meeting, but in fact declined. So Paul, would you like to carry on? Thank you.
I've met Sophie on several occasions. I know Sophie quite well. She's the shy, shrinking violet. She's in post to make a difference, and she's got some very clear views on what a difference looks like. I'm sure Sophie will come to our PSB at some point soon. I think that's her intention. She is building her office at the moment, and I think she's not the only one coming to terms with just the sheer size of her role. Because effectively, the way that the Wellbeing and Future Generations Act is framed, it's everything, all the time. And it's, I think for her to work out where best to penetrate is going to be quite tough. But I back her to do it. So I think on a relational basis, I describe certainly the relationship between Sophie and the council rather than the PSB as being promising and pretty strong. I think she's indicated a degree of comfort so far in the way that we are trying to move towards a way of thinking and a way of planning which is in keeping with the Wellbeing and Future Generations Act. But you'd expect me to say, you know, we've got a distance to travel yet. This is a very fundamental piece of legislation. But I expect Sophie to be quite active in the area. And I think if she feels that the Public Service Board are falling down in terms of the way that it's developing its thinking or its actions, and it doesn't comply or isn't given sufficient account to the Wellbeing and Future Generations Act, I think I'll know. I think I know very directly and very forcibly. But equally, why wouldn't the Public Service Board want to give account to the Wellbeing and Future Generations Act? It's an instrument of law. It's not going away. My own position is that it's one of the better pieces of legislation that have come forward. And I think our planning so far is in tune with it. And that seems to be the view, as I say, of Sophie's office, of Rita, who heads up Sophie's office, Rita Singh. And again, as a council, I keep deliberately trying to differentiate council from PSB. The early work that the Wales Audit Office did on our developing approach to the Wellbeing and Future Generations Act was pretty supportive, and on the basis that this team is the team that supports the PSB largely right now, I would expect that to cross-fertilise. Does that help?
Yeah, I think, you know, we'll welcome as the progress, you know, the relationship, you know, continues. It'd be useful to have that feedback, and I'm sure that'll happen. But I still think it'd be helpful for us to invite Sophie once again to another PSB meeting.
Yeah, that's Councillor Jones. In fact, she's actually stated that she would like to visit all councils to talk to them and perhaps train them, you know, into and enlighten them as to her way forward. So I'm sure she will come. And yes, I agree. One of the recommendations was we will re-invite her.
I think I'm going to be seeing Sophie in the next sort of 5-10 days. So again, I'll pass on that. And I think Sophie's only issue right now is a diary management issue, really. Certainly, I know she wants to be a local presence. So I'm sure she'll be here.
I think maybe it's because I'm being slightly mischievous here, because it's more for me an issue around her capacity to actually be able to support more widely. So it's not just an issue related to here. And I think the diary issue is no doubt going to be an issue for her unless her capacity increases, and that's a concern I have.
Councillor Taylor.
Just a couple of, just to check back, I've understood what you said, Paul, and a couple of questions from me, if I may. So, on the issue of the resourcing of the council to support the Public Service Board, my understanding is what you said was that obviously you can't predict the future, but at the moment you think that we do have the resources to do that. So that's the first thing. So we're taking assurance from you that at the moment this council has the resource to service the Public Service Board, and those conversations with the other partners are only emerging because it's a baby, but we don't know what that's going to look like. But at the moment we're fine. So that's what I've understood. So in a minute I'll just ask you to check that my understanding is correct. The second thing was, I suppose you were talking about the future trends work that Monmouthshire is commissioning for future Monmouthshire. And I like Councillor Petruni, I suppose I have a bit of a concern there that you said that if we were more sort of mature in our position, that it's something that the Public Service Board might have commissioned jointly. So I suppose my question is, so what you know, why the rush then? You know, is there any benefit to be garnered from forging ahead with the council leading that work? Is there nothing to be gained from awaiting a more mature debate and discussion with the Public Service Board? So that's just checking back that I've understood the reason why we've gone ahead and done that. And then from my point of view, so, and also I don't know if I should, we're not making a decision or anything here today, but I mean, just to declare that I'm an independent member of an Iron Bevan University Health Board. So it's a strange position because I would be sitting on the Public Service Board if I weren't a county councillor. So it's slightly unusual just to say that. But I have the strange, I'm not sure whether it was a pleasure or not, I did sit on the Local Service Board many years ago when I was a member of Gwent Police Authority. And I suppose I was, because you talk, Paul, about it used to be very tight and then it was very loose. And I was just looking through, I looked through the Local Service Board notes from like 2014 and I couldn't see much difference really in the membership from, you know, the long to now. And I really was wondering what the big difference, what the big so what is now, really. And I do appreciate that what you said about relationships will be mature, understand that. But I am, you know, interested in that so what, because I would concur with your observation that whilst it was quite rich in conversations and talking about interesting things, the outcomes were less obvious. So I guess I'm interested in what the change is.
Okay, Paul.
3 questions. Capacity. I think we're okay for the moment. I think we're okay, certainly in terms of moving towards a completed wellbeing assessment. And I think then we need to take stock. I think the Public Service Board will need to ask itself the question when it's clear in terms of what delivery looks like, whether it's geared up to be confident about that. So I would offer you a view that we're probably okay for the next 4 to 6 months, and then we need to reflect, would be my answer to your question. Future trends, it doesn't feel like a rush to me, actually. And as I tried to indicate to Councillor Petruni, it's the product of an open conversation with a range of partners in Monmouthshire. And the piece of work that we're looking to do ask questions about what we think Monmouthshire, rather than Monmouthshire County Council, will look like 5, 10, 15 years out. And for an organisation like ours, we then need to work out what that means for our structure and our response to that. So it's there's no reason for rush, and it doesn't feel like a rush. I think we're just trying to demonstrate some or to develop some additional layers of insight so that we can assure ourselves that we're moving in a direction that seems to be in sympathy with the way that our society is walking forward. So I don't think any of our partners, if you talk to them independently, and please do so, I don't think they say anything other than, do you know what, this is going to be really useful for us, and we look forward to seeing it. The big difference to me is in the programme board. Actually, it's not so much in the PSB or the LSB. We've got a really disciplined programme board now. We've appropriately culled a hell of a lot of partnership apparatus that wasn't adding value. Each of the remaining parts of our programme board infrastructure have got a really clear remit. They've got a really clear work plan. They've got a really clear, sorry if it sounds a bit managerial, but they've got a really clear accountable officer. They've got really clear timescales, and they deliver to them, and they hold each other to account. And I think it's become quite an effective work environment, rather than, if I were being harsh, I'd say perhaps an ineffective conversational environment. We have reduced the size of the LSB a little bit, but again, I'd say within the actual environment itself, the nature of the work is different. It's just more focused, and you know, people are, when people make a contribution, I think they know now that it needs to be relevant. And that, I think, wasn't always the case. But the thing making the difference is the orchestration of the programme board and the work streams that come together, and all the performance management, all the RAG ratings, everything that goes with that. It's not a soft environment now. I think it's a much more focused environment. I think, Sharon, you can probably talk to that more than I if you want to develop it. We certainly can as part of Agenda Item 7. That's the difference.
I was surprised no one else had asked you, but because you did offer it up. So what is your view then about the Monmouthshire Public Service Board versus a Gwent local service board, and then the kind of wider layering of the city region, and then the actually probably dozens of other partnership fora that exist where you've got the same people coming together talking about slightly different things.
I think the notion of a pan-Gwent public service board makes absolute sense. If you look, we've talked a little bit about the Wellbeing and Future Generations Act. We could have talked about the Social Care and Wellbeing Act. They both require exactly the same things, times 2, in terms of high-level partnerships within the Greater Gwent area, times 5, so you've got 10 things. I think those 10 things could become one thing. The question I've asked to Sharon, to Matt, to Hazel, to Will and to others is if we were a proponent of that move as a council, again, as a council rather than a PSB, could we have the assurance that we still have the ability to do our work that we consider to have a local identity? We're really confident in our programme board, and I think our programme board would be held together regardless of any move to a pan-Gwent footprint. I think there, if you excuse the partners, I just think there is shed loads of time and confusion to be saved by doing something once. And I don't think it would be asking Monmouthshire to trade out too much sovereignty. I think we would benefit by being involved in slightly wider conversations. That's my view.
Thank you. Councillor Farley.
Thank you. I'd like to go back a little bit, if I may, to the territory that Simon was working in, which was about the clusters, and I was struck, Paul, by your phrase, same conversations in different places. I suspect there will be variation between even the 5 places in Monmouthshire. Certainly the cluster meeting in Chepstow, which I attended wearing both this hat and hat as a town councillor, was very interested to hear about the PSB, was very interested to explore the potential for the cluster in effect becoming a scaled down and highly localised mirror even of the PSB, because there are some issues where the agencies need to work together locally but don't necessarily do so. I could give you examples on both the health and the police side. So I wouldn't myself want to lose the opportunity as council goes forward in the local governance arena with making a connection with PSBs. Admittedly not in the detailed way that we're trying to do here, but I think there is a connection, and the local clusters may well be a vehicle for bringing some of this stuff together locally and feeding upwards. That's just an observation, really.
I think, Councillor Farley, if I may come back on that, the point I was trying to make, and I probably didn't make it terribly well, is when I'm talking about same conversations in different places, I'm talking about the conversations that take place more in buildings like this than conversations that take place in rich communities. You know, we should forever try to find a way whereby, you know, we manage our business so that we're clear in terms of remit. Things get discussed once, decisions get taken, and we move on. I know that's not always easy. That's the nature of complex environments. That's the nature of political environments. That's the nature of, you know, officers that have got particular worldviews. But sometimes I think we should work harder as an organisation to mirror what we expect of others, which is sharp, clear decisions that are enacted. My comments weren't addressed at work that we do with communities.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Paul. At this stage, I think I will sum up and we'll go on to the next item. But I'd just like to thank you, Paul, for an interesting discussion, for leading the discussion, and for discussing, you know, reassuring us about the capacity of the Public Service Board to deliver the wellbeing assessment. I think, you know, we are also reassured that you're going to take stock, or the Public Service Board will take stock in the future about where it is going and its capacity to resource this, Monmouthshire's capacity to resource it. as you say, resources are on the edge, and you know, we don't want it. Perhaps greater integration should be encouraged in the future, so that less reliance on Monmouthshire. And I think the other thing that came up was fragmentation, or the danger of fragmentation. You know, if future Monmouthshire's going off into one area and another into another area, I know that's not the case at the moment, but we don't want it to be seen as such, that the Public Service Board should be at the centre of it all. I think at this stage, as you say, the focus is on the completion of the wellbeing assessment, and that's the way we should see it for now. Could I just clarify, please, when was your last meeting? We have it down as the 7th of April. Is that the case, Paul?
Yes, I believe that was the case.
Okay,
yes.
Thank you very much. Thank you. Right. The next item on the agenda is the scrutiny of the community engagement activity. And Matthew, Sharon and Hazel, I think you're going to take this forward and report on your emerging findings. So can I hand over to you, please?
Yes, thank you, Chair. And with your permission, I'll sort of kick off, and so Hazel and Sharon are able to sort of come in where needed. So I'll just sort of walk you through this. I understand you only had sight of this paper yesterday. So if I just give a little sort of walkthrough of the content. So the purpose is to give a sort of an update on progress and the planned activity ahead in terms of preparing the wellbeing assessment. I mean, members will be sort of familiar with the background in terms of the Act, but just to sort of put that context out there, you know, it's about improving the economic, social, environmental and cultural well-being of Wales. And of course, we've had a number of members' seminars on this, I think 3 over the course of 2017, culminating in the last one, which focused in on particular around the work on the well-being assessment and the public involvement. But really important around this is that sort of, you know, the PSB can and should expect to be scrutinised on the process of how its priorities have been agreed. And so the evidence base that this wellbeing assessment and the involvement exercise produces is absolutely essential in ensuring that those sort of priorities are underpinned by a strong evidence base. There are a number of sort of appendices attached to the report that I'll sort of pick up. The first of which is the guidance around the wellbeing assessment and how the Public Service Board produced the wellbeing assessment. And one of the key things to remind the committee of is that it is an analysis of well-being. Previously, the Public Service Board, or rather the Local Service Board, had a needs analysis. And the difference between a needs analysis and a well-being analysis is very different. It's very much about recognising the assets within communities and starting from that position. And there it ties in very closely to the Social Services and Wellbeing Act, which very much recognises the strength that people and communities have and the assets within them. And that very much informed the way in which we carried out the wellbeing assessment and the involvement. Appendix 2, which I'll walk through in a bit more detail, shows some of the overview of the activity we've had to date in terms of involving people. Appendix 3, the emerging findings. We've unconventionally gone not to have an Appendix 4, but instead to go for 2 Appendix 5s, which I spotted slightly earlier on as I was reading through this. So the first of the Appendix 5s is the remaining events we've got in the engagement calendar. And to talk back to the previous point in terms of the depth of discussion we've had around communities. We've been, I think, to somewhere between 25 and 30 events so far. Hazel, I'm not sure, it may feel like more than that to you, because to be fair to Hazel and Rhiannon Cook in the comms and engagement team as well, they've borne a lot of the brunt of this, spending a lot of their weekends and evenings out at community groups. And integral to that has been the point that Paul mentioned earlier. This is not about us sitting in County Hall and expecting people to come to us. This has been going out to events where there is a footfall of people, to target those areas where Monmouthshire residents are, to have conversations with them in those sorts those sorts of spaces. And Councillor Taylor can vouch for the fact I spent a very wet Saturday afternoon in Mega Square doing just that. But that's been incredibly informative. So Appendix 5 just picks up some of the remaining events. And then the second of the Appendix 5 just gives you some of the next steps in terms of the overall production of the well-being assessment. But before getting into that, if I can just spend a little bit of time talking around the well-being assessment and the work we've done to involve people. So involvement absolutely is one of the 5 key ways of working put in there by the Act. It's about long-term, collaborative, preventative, integrated and key involving. This is not just about us writing a well-being assessment up here on floor 1 of County Hall and sending it out and saying, what do you think? We've very much taken the approach of going out there and talking with people. So what we've done, we've taken an early cut of some of the data. There's quite a few evidence pieces that the guidance around this Act says are integral. It's the data, the sort of facts. There are national well-being indicators that have been prescribed as part of this Act, which are produced by Welsh Government. There's also a huge amount of other local data available to us. And that's things like public transport journey times around the county. If you live in the centre of Monmouthshire, how long does it take you to get to a GP surgery? How long does it take you to get to a leisure centre? Because it's understanding some of the differences within our communities. So it's surfacing some of that data and then going out and having conversations with people to say, well, this is what the numbers say, but actually what's your lived experience? Because we know sometimes if we write a report based on statistics, that may be very different to the experiences of people in our communities. So we've gone out, surfaced that data with the sort of the boards and the material you see there, which has been very consciously put out there, not as a Monmouthshire County Council exercise, but our Monmouthshire. Going back to that strength-based thing, this is all of our Monmouthshire, all of our county. It's not about one single public body. Also key parts in terms of evidence being future trends that was mentioned earlier. Welsh Government are commissioning a small future trends piece, but it's not going to be with us in time to inform the production of the well-being assessment. So there is a need for us to do more in this area, because this is not just about communities now, it's about communities in future and the sorts of things, people that we talk to now, and actually children we talk to now. Rihanna, as we talk at the moment, is out I think in one of the schools in consulting with groups of young people. I think she was talking to 10-year-olds yesterday that in some cases were sort of drawing their vision of the future on A4 paper for us. So it's the future trends and also some of the academic research, all of which we need to bring together to ensure that we have a very robust evidence base. So Appendix 3 kind of. Oh, I mean, what I will say about that as well, I think, what have we had, Hazel? Something, we've gone out, and people will be aware of it, it's been downstairs with these postcards. So we surface some of the facts on these maps, and then people have been using postcards to add in their comments and thoughts. And 2 key questions: what's good about your community, and what would make it better? This, because that's consciously not saying what's the need. It's about what can we do together as the communities of Monmouthshire, and not saying if you write this, the council will make it better. It's about surfacing some of those issues for working together in a sort of co-production way. So yes, so some of the findings there are in Appendix 3. Probably some of the key things that keep coming out again and again. Affordable housing, particularly for young people. Affordable housing. And the big disparity we have in Monmouthshire between wage levels and the cost of housing. So our wage levels, we know this from the data, are if you live and work in Monmouthshire, you're drawing your salary from a business based in Monmouthshire, earnings are currently not high relative to the UK and the rest of Wales. Yet actually the average price of properties in Monmouthshire is very high and is above the UK average. That's something that's coming out quite a lot through young people. from young people. Equally, we're having a view from others saying, well, actually, when there is new housing development, is there sufficient resource going into the development of infrastructure? So there are different views on this, and depending who you talk to in a community, there are different lenses people are looking at. But coming through very strongly, wage levels and availability of employment being another key one. And when you're out in the south of the county, people are also talking about the impact of the bridge on both employment opportunities and the economy. One of the other key things coming out a lot is transport, particularly in the rural areas and particularly impacting on young people. Again, it impacts on the job market. If you need to get to work and you need to commute to work, then if you've got two people working in a household, that often means you need two cars because the transport, the rural sort of transport provision isn't as strong as in some areas. So we've seen quite a number of these themes come through. Also, a lot of positive feedback on a number of areas. The sense of community in Monmouthshire. The countryside, tending to be thinking about future generations very much a here and now. So we've also had issues on sort of opportunities for farmers. We're very much an agricultural county, but where are the opportunities for people to remain in that sector? So that's sort of giving you some of the sort of findings that are emerging, and the next steps. And I'll sort of pause at that point because Hazel and Sharon may want to come in and add a little more. But what we've got to do now, we've got someone sat next door at the moment, a local student, a Chepstow resident who's an undergraduate at Cardiff Uni. We've just got him for a couple of days to physically make sense of all the postcards, because we've had 800, at least 800, maybe over 1,000 of these back at this point, where people have shared views with us. And that's quite time consuming. So we brought him in for a couple of days to capture some of this evidence and feed it in. And then we're getting together as a group of officers on Thursday to look at all of the evidence we've got and begin the process of planning out how we begin to produce this well-being assessment. And the intention is, I'm going to ask the programme board, which meets on Friday, to nominate sort of representatives from the different organisations that would sort of form a bit of it might seem a grand title, but an editorial board, so that this isn't written by the backbone structure pure in the council. It's actually reflecting all of the evidence that partners would expect to see. Because it is fair to say that although we've probably, as an organisation, carried the weight of this involvement exercise, our partners have at times been coming out with us and running some of these events. So we've had the police community support officers out there, colleagues in and Ira and Bevan have run some sessions. So it's not been a standalone exercise by the local authority. And very important now is that we go forward. They're also involved in shaping the well-being assessment based on the evidence we've got. And so before inviting questions, Sharon, Hazel, is there anything in particular you want to add into that?
Just thinking about Councillor Howell's point earlier about, making sure that we're not just focusing on the towns. We've made a real conscious effort to try and go to more rural communities, to places like Tintern, Shine, Newton, Gilwan, and some of the larger villages that perhaps do get left out of things. And we're trying not to, expect people always to be travelling into the main towns. So we're trying to go out to those. Also, just to say, we've also consciously thought about the protected characteristics and equal opportunities, and made sure that we've gone to groups that represent various different protected characteristics, so that they have their opportunity to get their voices heard as well. And also just a reminder that, if people don't go out, if people, get all their shopping online, so they don't go into the town or see people or whatever, there's always the online option as well. And we've got an online survey that people can fill in, and people can contribute their ideas through our Made Open platform as well. So compared with other local authorities, we've invested a lot in the community engagement. And Welsh Government kind of recognise that as well in terms of the kind of consultation that we will have to do on the wellbeing assessment when it's produced. You know, we can be more proportional about that because the community have been so involved in producing it effectively in the first place. It's not like when we do the consultation on it, it's the first time anyone's seen it because the public have been involved in shaping it from the very start. And the other, just one thing I wanted to come in on the future trends talk and the question about whether it's sort of too early to be doing sort of the future trends, but the legislation says that the future trends have to feature in our wellbeing assessment. So we do, you know, very much need to be factoring it in and considering it now because it has to inform our wellbeing assessment. And the latest I've heard from Welsh Government is that it may be about November time, actually, that we're getting the future trends report. But that will be quite high level. It's not likely to say much that we don't already know. It's not going to be at a very local level. It's going to be kind of Wales-wide trends, if not, you know, national trends. Okay.
Thank you, Sharon. Do you want to say something? Yeah.
Sorry, it was just to come in really to kind of reinforce some of the information that Hazel's provided and some of the questions earlier around some of the Commissioner's involvement. I do attend a Welsh Government network meeting for PSB officers, which they've just recently extended to the other statutory partners of the PSB, so health boards, natural resources and fire and rescue also attend. At the last meeting I attended last week, there's a lot of discussion. We all share information across the local authorities about how we're approaching the assessments, how we're gathering the information and how we're forming our PSB and our scrutiny arrangements really. So we do share a lot of information. There has been, as Hazel said, a lot of interest from other local authorities in terms of how we've approached our engagement. Welsh Government are quite impressed with how we've approached this and how we're being very inclusive around it. So other authorities have made inquiries about that and how we're conducting that piece of work. And also, just to add a bit around our scrutiny arrangements of this, we are one of the only local authorities in Wales to have an up and running scrutiny running parallel with the whole of the wellbeing assessment. So we have been asked to speak at the event that they're holding in November to discuss the scrutiny arrangements and how scrutiny is actually informing the wellbeing assessment as we go through.
I think before I bring anyone else in, I think you should all be congratulated on your approach and the implementation of this assessment and how well advanced you are. So well done. Councillor Jones, Sarah Jones, and then Councillor.
That was the first thing I was going to say was, you know, to start with, it's a great piece of work. I've got to say, out of all the communication and engagement this council does, which is pretty effective over the years, this is probably the best piece I've seen. But off the back of that, they've got a couple of comments and questions and suggestions, if that's okay, just in terms of how you take it forward. The first question was around Made Open, and I think that's a great platform for how we engage with our residents, but I think that could be more publicised more with residents, and it's just whether we can try and push that a bit more. Looking at the comments on there, there's only 20 odd comments on there, but I think again that's a really accessible format to be able to capture some of this information. So maybe in those final couple of months of engagement we could push that a bit more. You mentioned, I think the branding and everything is fantastic and I think it's great, but I personally I might sit on the other side of the fence, I do think Monmouthshire Council's logo should be more prominent on there. I know it's about us all taking ownership and trying to move away from that, but actually let's link it to us because this is a fantastic initiative that's being taken as part of this process. Just interested in the capacity to continue this level of engagement because clearly a lot of officer resource is going to be dedicated to this, and again, a fantastic team effort, but and I know this is a set piece of work, but we're going to need to continue this engagement to some extent in the years to come to ensure that those needs are being met. So it's whether we've got the capacity to do that. Sorry, I've got just two other notes, just suggestions. And the other thing, just suggestions, it would be great maybe just to engage members more in terms of who you should be approaching. So the community groups, particularly rural community groups from my own perspective, the groups in my own community that maybe wouldn't have been approached, then I can help and offer advice, and I'm sure the members can do the same. And I think just it would be great to have a seminar, an all-members seminar on the findings that have been, you said you've got the student looking at some of the results at the moment. I'm sure you're going to bring all that study together and to have an all-members seminar just to really understand the issues that are going to go into the wellbeing assessment would be really helpful. But sorry, there's quite a lot there, but I just think it's great. It's really positive and just really motivating to see the work that's been done. So.
Yes, Councillor Jones. Do you want to come back on that, or are you all right? Councillor Twenty first.
I think that was all helpful actually, and in terms of the member seminar to bring back the findings. We haven't got anything in the diary, but we'd certainly be looking to bring those findings back. Not least they inform this work, but also actually they're going to be pretty essential into informing the work under future Monmouthshire as well. So it's a key piece of evidence for that. Yes, our own well-being objectives as an organisation.
Right, Councillor Petroni.
Thank you, Chair. It sounds really good. I don't have, you'll be pleased to know, really kind of difficult questions maybe. But I'd just slightly disagree with Councillor Jones, actually. I'd like it that there's no county council symbol on there, purely because people will approach a council in a already defensive and negative way. So I suspect when they see a council symbol, they say, and my bin wasn't collected, or this street light is on. And actually, taking that out of the equation straight away means they're probably more, well, they're less defensive. That's just my opinion. I think that's quite a prudent move, personally. On timescale, I've noticed that you sort of have the report sort of finalised by next March, if I got that sort of right. Is that deliberate in the sense, so kind of the major evidence base will be ready for the new council? Some of us are standing again, some of us are not. So the kind of new intake, is that kind of deliberate, or is it just how that's just circumstance?
No, that one's the legislation, so it needs to be within 12 months of the Assembly elections, which would take us into May. But actually, we brought it back to March because of PERDA, because potentially once this gets into the political domain and starts to feed into priorities, we're best to try and wrap that up before we get into the 6 weeks PERDA period pre-council election. But actually, it is helpful in terms of its timing. It does sit quite well then in terms of giving us an evidence base to inform the priorities of the organisation as well as of the county through the PSB.
Yeah. Great, thank you. And the last one is, I'm interested, maybe this is a bit of a geeky question, weighting of the evidence. So you talked about rural communities and urban communities and scales of responses. And I'm just wondering how you're going to square the circle in terms of, you may have 200 comments about housing, for example, and 5 about, I've noticed you've got educational psychology on there, which was an interesting comment. So that could be from 5 people. How do you square that whole way in terms of priority putting on the housing, presumably, but educational psychology to a smaller number of people maybe, but just as important, maybe more important? Do you know what I mean? How do you do that in terms of scale and importance?
Yeah, I think that's a very good point. I mean, there's 2 challenges here. One for us in terms of officers writing the wellbeing assessment and ensuring that issues that have only been identified by 2 or 3 people, but which may be absolutely integral to those, and from perhaps a small cohort. If you're talking about, I've met parents of a group of parents of children with autism, you're not going to expect that to come through in hundreds and hundreds of responses. But actually, if you've met 10 of those parents and 5 or 6 of them are all saying the same thing, then actually that's something which needs to have some sort of weight in the narrative. I'm fortunate to say, in terms of when this work subsequently goes forward to the PSB to actually set priorities, I mean, that will become a difficult job. There will be a huge amount of evidence and a wide range of potentially competing priorities. And Paul has mentioned earlier, there's very much a desire for a smaller set of priorities. And at that point, I think we get into conversations of which of these things would benefit from cross-sector involvement and which would be specific to one agency. So if ambulance response times are coming through, for example, we'd probably expect that to sit squarely at the door of an Iron Bevan, whereas something such as obesity, for example, is a cross-agency response because there are so many different facets and ways of working at what would be a complex problem. In terms of the exact way forward, we're starting this process now on Thursday. We're also sort of working quite closely with Welsh Government and if we need to talk to sort of academics and others, we certainly talk with the head of analytics at Welsh Government to get some advice from them in terms of this. But we think that such is the way we've constructed the evidence base, we should be able to come to a sort of reasonable position where everything is sort of reflected and you understand the kind of methodology behind it when it's produced.
Thank you. Councillor Farley.
Thank you. I mean, I'm very impressed by this, and congratulations. It strikes me, on the basis of the paper, which is perhaps a bit unfair, we're stronger on the touchy-feely stuff than we are on the numbers. So when we've got in each section of the emerging findings, the data suggests, can you just give us a bit of a feel for where that is coming from? Are we digging ourselves and coming up with stuff? Are we getting help from particularly Public Health Wales? I say I'm impressed by what we're doing. I just want to know who else is playing on the street.
Yeah, sure. I'm very conscious, probably on the basis of the couple of sentences in that Appendix 3, it might look as though we're light on the data. I can assure you that most definitely isn't the case. We are almost drowning in data at the moment, and the reason there's only a few sentences there is we've yet to do enough analysis to fully make sense of that. We've got a group which meets at a Gwent level called Gwent Strategic Wellbeing Assessment Group, or GSWAG. So we meet fairly regularly, and we secured some funding from Welsh Government and have used that to commission Data Unit Wales to do some initial sort of trawling and pulling together of data at a local level. We also have within the team colleagues that are working to sort of surface all of the available data sets we have, and then we're looking at those in both the themes, economic, social, environmental, cultural, but also cutting down to a local level where that data is available at a local level. So in the guidance, it talks, don't go down to ward level. If you go down to ward level, it's too much. And hence we've ended up with this cluster, which works very well in terms of some of the other conversations of kind of thinking of a town at the centre, but with the rural heartland around it. But within that, you do see differences. So we've got data at all of these different sorts of levels, and I think we've got sort of 800 or 900 data items at the moment. We're meeting with Anira and Bevan with Public Health Wales, all of whom are doing pieces of analysis. I think we had something through last week, Hazelsham, didn't we, from Natural Resources Wales, their sort of latest analysis. So the task for us as officers now is to work through all of this and draw out the key points from this evidence, and then sort of synthesize that from Monmouthshire context to inform the wellbeing assessment. So we have a few heavy weeks of reading in the coming months. Yeah.
But yes, okay, yes, of course.
Kind of our thinking at the moment, and I'd just be interested in your views, for the actual production of the wellbeing assessment. We want it to be something that's accessible and that people are interested in and want to pick up and read. So we want it to have a few infographics. We want to have kind of narrative and description and stuff like that, with the bulk of the kind of data and stuff perhaps as appendices or something at the back. We don't want it to be something that's so full of numbers and tables and stuff that it's inaccessible, because as much as anything, PSB members who are going to have to act on it have to, understand it. They have to be engaged by it, as do the wider public. So I'm, just interested in kind of views on that and whether that's the right approach to take.
Before we go further with that, Councillor Farley would just like to come back.
Thank you for that. I hoped that's what you would say. I was fairly sure that you would. I think as we go forward, it would be worth spending a little bit of time to just set out the inner workings of all of this, because it's quite clearly a team effort. There's clearly expertise being drawn on, as we implied in the earlier part of the discussion about, who is actually involved. It's quite clear that this is where others are taking part. And from the scrutiny point of view, very good to know that. And maybe then a little glimpse of the workings next time. GSWAG sounds absolutely fascinating, on a level with your wonderful Mr. Murgatroyd and all that sort of thing. But no, that's exactly, I'm grateful for the answer, Matthew and colleagues. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Taylor.
Thank you. I have to say it's really good to see an asset-based analysis, as opposed to, as you said previously, a needs-based analysis. And I had 2 points to make. First of all, it was following on from what Councillor Jones said, and it's not about, for me, having members there when these events are happening. It's about engaging members so that you can capitalise on members' local knowledge, and also for access, because that may be the case, as Councillor Batruni says, that conversations might be different if members are there and they're not there. That's fine. I haven't got an issue with that, but I do think that it should save really officers time and effort if they can get good local knowledge from members, and get members to help advertise the opportunity. And I think that's a trick missed on perhaps some of it, if that is not the case. I do know that officers did speak to me about the rainy day in Mega, and we are expecting you back for some more cake, but there we are. The second point is further takes Councillor Batruni's point a little further, because I was going to ask a similar question. I don't think it's a geek question, actually, but Dimitri, at all. The issue of how you make sense of so many responses, because let's say we have got 900 responses to date, which is about 1% or so of the population. They could be as diverse as 900 different issues drawn up, or what's good and what could be better. Notwithstanding, you are working with some of the other agencies. Yes, for example, they will have some clear priorities from, for example, the engagement work and in Bevan has been doing around access and so on and so forth, which should help triangulate those things. But where's the bit where, if we have 50 emerging themes in that, or could be more than that, broadly, that we try and delve a little deeper into those emerging themes, so that we've got a bit of substance, rather than, for example, those of us that have sat on the strategic transport group would say that public transport is always an issue. I note that that's one of the emerging themes across the area. But where's the bit where, for example, we might kind of dig a little deeper on that and say we've had some feedback around quality and availability of public transport. Do you have any, in a very open way, so that we're not leading people, clearly. So that's a question, really, about, in order to help us make sense of it. Because if the PSB, as you quite rightly say, have got to act on this, and as Paul says, they're planning to take on a small, and when you say small, I'm imagining 2 or 3 issues. It might not even be 2 and 3, I don't know. How do you distill that down into 2 or 3 workable issues that the PSB are going to act on, that are going to make a huge so what difference in Monmouthshire?
Okay, if I pick up on that last one first, I think that's probably the most sort of substantial there. There's a phase 2 to this piece of work, which initially we were planning on sort of starting roundabout now, which is to sort of go out and get views from those initial conversations, and then actually have some more involved groups. So as issues are starting to emerge, to call almost a sort of bespoke group around a particular issue. So if it is a case of rural transport is emerging as a theme, say, right, we're going to have a session on some of these areas, and actually invite people with an interest to focus in more detail. It was originally our intention to do that this side of Christmas. In a sense, the engagement events have been a bit of a victim of their own success, in that the more you go out, the more people say, oh, come here and talk to us. And so that's taken quite a huge amount of our capacity. So we've decided we're going to do an initial sort of cut of that. And the actual guidance behind the well-being assessment and the well-being plan talks about 2 different kind of notions. One, it talks of what it calls a situation analysis, which is what's kind of the situation, and broadly, which is what we're doing with the well-being assessment. And then secondly, it talks about a response analysis. What are you going to do about it? Which is, we think, probably something we're going to get into more next year as we begin to shape up the well-being plan with the public service board. So we think at that point, that's when we'll start to have more of those in-depth conversations to better understand some of those issues that have been surfaced and work with community groups and experts to try and understand what the response may be to them. But there will, you know, there is still a job to be done in terms of prioritising and making sense and clustering that work for the initial wellbeing assessment. But we think actually let's put that more detailed piece into 2017 when we'll have a little bit more time to do it properly.
Doesn't quite answer my question, I have to say, because I would, you know, anticipate. Sorry, the word expert horrifies me a little more than G-swag, I have to say, in this context, because this is about, you know, people's lived experiences, and I'm assuming you mean community members when you're talking about experts, because they'd be the experts in their own situation, which is what the basis of this is. But I guess I'm talking about how you, so I understand that phase about, you know, what do you do, you know, what we can do about it then, you know, okay, we've got these issues, but it's more for me how we effectively triangulate some of that and have a slightly deeper conversation. So you're suggesting to me that that is going to happen. That's what I'm interested in. And just, sorry, that's right, yes? That's, yeah. And on Hazel's point, I think that if it's going to be any use, it has to be accessible, doesn't it? And so I think we've probably got a bit of a job of work there because I don't think public bodies are very good at writing anything that's accessible, really, you know. Well, if it's only going to be, you know, 2 or 3, you know, it's going to be some key issue, you know, there's going to be some broad themes, and then there's going to be some, then I guess maybe that makes it easier.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Petroni, sorry.
I look forward to G-Swag's next album, to be honest. I'm going to buy it.
Heavy metal, please.
On advice, I would say cut out the jargon, the kind of it's the same old rhetoric, kind of business language, which is impenetrable sometimes. So I implore you, make it clear and plain language. That's the only advice I would give. The data obviously put at the back, yeah, but plain and clear language, I beg you.
I think that's a very good point, Councillor Petroni. Councillor Jones.
It's going right back, sorry, so just to Hazel's point about the launch of the assessment, and yeah, totally agree. Let's get this really infographic-led rather than data-led if we want to get the local buy-in to what it means to them. And going back to Paul's point originally about the PSB findings direction, and we need to look at the way it's perceived by the public, then obviously how we launch the assessment itself is critical. And just in terms of utilising, again, our experience as members, we'd welcome, I'm sure, the opportunity to be involved. I know you've got fantastic experts in your comms team who can advise on that, but possibly when it comes back to scrutiny, and I'm assuming you'll bring the assessment or your findings and the fuller report back to our scrutiny panel. And you've got it down in here as February. Our next meeting's January. It is leaving things a bit tight on time, I think, for you guys, but hopefully that's not going to be an issue, and you'll be able to bring something to that meeting. And again, we can feed in terms of ideas and things for the launch to make sure our communities get buy-in to that.
I think I can point out at this stage, I think we'll have some flexibility in our own meetings, probably to suit the needs, so that would make sense. Anybody on Councillor Jones? No? Oh, okay. Councillor Guppy.
So the question in view of you getting other evidence from statutory bodies and things, are you going to ask them to present it in a certain way in view of you've got some emerging themes, or rather than just give you a dearth of information that actually it's sort of broken down a little bit more so that you can process it quicker? Are you taking that approach, or are you just going to get the raw information? Because presumably if you're getting it from the experts in the area, or people that are working day to day within that area, it might speed up the process. I don't know, how have you asked for the other information to be presented to you, really?
Yeah, I mean, we're lucky with most of this because they are partners and they're part of the dialogue. So a lot of the people bringing forward evidence like Natural Resources, like Public Health Wales, are part of this process and actually sit on the Gwent group, whose name I shall not mention again for fear of attracting smiles. So actually, in drafting that, they've kind of come to us initially and said, well, if we go with this template, how accessible is that? Is that useful? So most of the partner stuff is pretty good. We also have the sort of broader evidence base, which is not things that we've commissioned or requested, but nonetheless is really useful. So, you know, we've got some of the stuff that comes out of universities. We've got the Public Policy Institute for Wales that was set up a couple of years ago. They're producing some quite interesting papers. But yeah, generally from the partners, absolutely fine. It's produced in a sort of digestible and relatively accessible format. And then as far as the other stuff goes, we'll have a sort of job to do in terms of dividing that up amongst the team and sharing the joy of reading some of that and pulling out some of the key messages from it. But yeah, partners have been very, very good as far as this process goes.
I think at that stage we can sum up, please. I'd just like to congratulate you all once again on the hard work, and also recognise how much work you are doing, especially going out to the public to engage with them. And it is appreciated, and I'm sure the outcomes will be successful. Our aim for this particular part of the agenda was to make sure that satisfactory progress was being done. And I think I can safely say that on behalf of all of us here that, you know, that is taken for granted now that satisfactory progress is being done on this assessment. But we look forward to the updates. And at this stage, I will say that we will change our meeting date to suit your needs. All right? And to fit in with you, because otherwise, you know, we're not going to go much further. Okay. Thank you very much for that. I have got recommendations, but I will bring them all together at the end. All right. For now, we'll go on to the next item on the agenda, please, which is terms of reference for the PSB Select Committee. And as you know, we did agree the draft terms of reference and forward work programme for the PSB Select Committee. It's been brought together. It is included in your pack, and I wonder if we could just say at this stage that you are accepting of it. Do you accept this draft terms of reference, or do you want to have a debate on it?
I don't think we need a debate, just as a working, I would call it a working draft of reference. So if we do spot something, we can amend it.
Absolutely. Thank you very much, Councillor Dimitri. So can we record that as a working draft, terms of reference for the Public Service Board Select Committee, and we take that as passed. Thank you very much. Right, the next item on the agenda is to consider the Select Committee's forward work programme. Again, you have this with you, and you will see that it's the next date was the 18th of January, which was, we were going to scrutinise progress on the wellbeing assessment. And I think at this stage, we need to go a bit later. Matthew, have you any ideas when you will be ready to...
I think in the work plan, I didn't have the date to hand for the next meeting of this committee when I put it down. So we kind of, I guess February would have been ideal from our point of view, because we're looking at this going to sort of PSB towards the end of March. That potentially also requires a date shift, which sort of Sharon said we might be looking at a joint PSB programme board. It's also, because of its importance for the council, as it is, I think we've got it on the council planner potentially. That's a conversation we just need to play out. So sometime in sort of mid-February would be ideal if you were able to accommodate a meeting change, just to allow those extra few weeks to get the work done.
So do you think something like the end of February around there?
Yeah, possibly even a little earlier than that.
All right. Okay, well.
I mean, what we probably do, because even though we're doing all this involvement, there does need to be a statutory consultation period.
Yeah.
So the options are, it could be towards the end of that, when we've had all the feedback, but perhaps the consultation period is still open, so that you could see some of what's coming back from the consultation, and then have that opportunity for a final sort of shaping of it through the scrutiny process. So
thank you. Yes,
mid to late February.
I was actually thinking of half term is in that week, in that month as well, so we kind of avoid that. But perhaps you could discuss with Hazel at some stage and get together on a future date. Is that all right with the rest of the members? It just makes sense. It's silly to have a meeting prior to that. Yes, please, absolutely. And also, of course, there would have been a PSB board to discuss by then as well. Hopefully. Yes, you said that, Councillor Petrini. Right, I'd just like to really make some recommendations, and the first one, I think, is to re-invite the Commissioner as soon as possible, really. I realise, of course, that she's busy in diary implications, but if we give her a choice of dates, then perhaps she could come and talk to us. The second one is to ask Paul, of course, to take forward as chair of PSB the recommendations that we've given you, i.e. a designated deputy, and in lieu of the absence of a chairman of the member, and a brief action list which is raised from the PSB meeting so that it will aid and help us as a scrutiny committee. Another thing, the third item is the engagement of members. Perhaps emails can be sent out. Matthew, I don't know how quite this would work, so that members, as Councillor Taylor has suggested, are engaged more in the process of this assessment, not necessarily to be standing there, but to actually use their expertise on the area that they represent and their experience. So I don't quite know how this would come about, but it's going to be a recommendation, plus a member seminar for all members as to the progress of this at some stage.
And yeah, in addition to the seminar, when there are, as we produce drafts of this, sort of assessment, that is circulated to all members. Thank you.
Yes, because as we all know, attendance at seminars is not always 100%. So I think it would be, a very good recommendation to send it out, a draft version to all members. And obviously the last one would be the change of date, which we have just done, and to take the 18th of January out of the work programme. Right, I think that just about completes the meeting. I hope, I'd like to thank everybody for coming. Thank you, Paul, for your leading the discussion, which was very informative, very interesting, and thank you, officers, for all that you've contributed. Thank you. I'd like to close the meeting now. Thank you.